Well, hello, and welcome back to Read Becca for a discussion of a book that I think is kind of crazy pants. And that book is The Spear Cuts Through Wire by Simon Jimenez. This is a very singular book. It's my current 2023 favorite book so far, by a long shot. It will take a really, really special book to unseat this, and I don't foresee that happening right now. But this is so different, and yet it feels like so many mythic fantasies I've read before, has so many elements that I love and find familiar, but the execution here is something unlike anything I've read. So ostensibly, this is the story of Kima and June, Jun, not June. Kima is the last of a warrior tribe, now is in this place where he's an outcast, because his tribe is no longer. He is a spear-wielding one-armed warrior, or trying to be, and not totally succeeding. Because he's an outcast, he's kind of looked down on, and he ends up banding together with June, who is a soldier of the Emperor's Guard that has kind of been relegated to an isolated room guarding a door. And he also really feels isolation as a result of that role. So the two of them are very outsiders who have been loners, and yet they are forced together as they go on the run with an item, I will say, an unusual item, and on their heels are the baddies. So they're on this journey constantly beset by the villains, ever nipping at their heels, and to make their way forward, they kind of encounter a lot of challenges, a lot of quirky characters who help them along the way. These two men are so different as individuals, and yet they find very strong common ground in the things they want for the place that they live and for the people there, that largely go back to these villains who are kind of demigods and working under the emperor, who has been a tyrant, a tyrannical ruler oppressing everyone, and not quite sane, perhaps. There's a lot of not quite sane stuff going on here. In fact, there's a whole element of tortoises, these giant tortoises who can talk, and they are crazy, but it's because they're all directly connected. All of the giant tortoises are, and they have godlike powers as well. And they're used kind of like telephones because they're all connected. So they're the messaging system of this world. So the tortoises really stood out to me as a quirky oddity in this story. I really loved them. But we have lots of elements like that, with this godlike magic that's been clearly imbued into our story from the root of this is the moon on the water, is something the emperor fell in love with, and the moon became personified and brought these godlike powers to Earth. And so we have that sort of Asian style in the kind of connectedness with nature and nature as power. And so I found that really wonderful, but there is a stronger tie-in to sort of Asian styling in the imagery that's used. There's a lot of natural imagery in terms of masks with animals on them, fans with similar iconography on them, silks, and a lot of ceramics. All of that, I think, is done subtly, so I couldn't quite tell what Asian inspiration it is, but it is clearly there, and it does feel very strong like an Asian mythic fantasy. So I loved that element, that comes through so strongly in the story. So everything that I have told you so far is kind of the bottom layer of this story, and it's in fact not how we enter the story. So what is so different and unique about this is that it's told at 3 different layers. So we enter the story from the sort of upper layer, and in fact that's in a more modern time. It's told in second person from someone I couldn't quite put my finger on when it's happening. It seems to be early 1900s, around the time that a war is going on. I don't know which war. There are things like radios and cars and telephones, that sort of thing. So it's certainly the past if it is real world. It's not clear if it is in a real world setting, but it's being told in second person. So either we or the target character are being told the story of our ancestry and this spear of the title, the history of that item by a matriarch of the family. And so we're in a kind of more modern setting for this, and it completely sets the stage in a different way. But to the setting the stage, the second layer down is the inverted theater. And so In the first, we're being told a story. In the second, we're watching a story play out on a stage in either a literal or a metaphorical sort of an ideology that is this theater, where the story is being presented of this epic journey and the story of the family ancestral spear. And then the third layer is the actual story of Jun and Kima's journey. And in that version, we are being told the story in third and first person. And interestingly, mostly third person, but the bits where it flips to first person are not from our characters. They are random side characters thrown in the middle of paragraphs, and we just get their momentary perspective. So it's literally the last background character that was referenced. We then get a line of what they're thinking. It's so interesting, so well done. It sounds ridiculously complicated, but it actually works. It took me a little while to figure out that was actually what's going on. But once I did, I was like, this creates so much more layering because we are getting the perspective of just random peasants around, random people alongside what's happening, rather than the main key players. And we get that all throughout. There are points in this where we got 2 or 3 of those digressions into somebody's perspective in a single paragraph. And you would think that would be too much, but it completely works. So as far as the structure to this, it's so wild. It's back to my point at the beginning. It is crazy pants. I thought it was a lot more complicated than it actually is when I started, because obviously I didn't know how deep does this go? How many layers and changes of perspective are we going to have? And so I was overly paying attention and working too hard. Really, this is quite easy to follow, despite that fact that you're kind of gradually working in and out of these layers of storytelling. It makes perfect sense where you are at as it's being told. And once you pick up on exactly what is happening in each layer, you will not have trouble with following it, I don't think. And that's part of the mastery of the author's work. The craft perspective to this is just mind-boggling to manage those 3 layers so well, and also manage to have lyrical prose at every level and appropriate setting for each sort of time or place that is being imparted, despite the fact that they're so different in terms of how people are talking or the sense of place. Wildly different, but each time it feels completely tangible. So I loved that aspect. The lyricality of the prose, the lushness of it. I absolutely have to read off a little section here so you can get a flavor, because it is so good. This is right up there with poetry in terms of the writing. It just stands out so strongly. And I don't remember Vanished Birds being quite this lush, but it was very well written from a descriptive aspect. This just seems to ramp it up even another notch beyond what Vanished Birds had.
Once the moon and the water were in love. She lingered on that word, love, just as the smoke lingered in the air. You can imagine it was not the most convenient affair. One was trapped in the heavens, the other the earth. One was stillness itself, the other made only of waves and tempests, but they were happy for a time. The moon would bathe the water in its radiance, and the water would dance with its ebb and flow to the moon's suggestion. And though they occupied different spheres, they were able to visit one another through less direct means, for there is no barrier in this life that love cannot overcome. The water would send up to the skies plump storm clouds swollen with its essence, its cool mist and salty breath kissing the moon's dry and cracked surface, and the moon, when it wished to visit the water, would cast its reflection into the water's surface, and in the inverted world that lies suspended below our own, the glass, still water, they would meet and dance and make love.
We're also told very early on that this is a love story, too. Decidedly not a romance, but it does contain a lovely queer love story. So we have that sort of breadth of human experience through this. We also have a lot of very graphic violence. So on top of the beauty, we have the harshness of this story, where we have these villains who have godlike powers, and many of the godlike powers are mental. I would say that's the prominent sort of magic to this, is a lot of mental things. So there's some weird stuff with telekinesis. I would put out there is really graphic content here. For example, one of the characters who is a villain, we immediately find this out about him when he's introduced, but he has the power of suggestion. And It's kind of like, think Prince Joffrey from Game of Thrones if he had power of suggestion. Because very much this villain is often doing horrific things to people for his entertainment through this power. And, like, to the point of death, mutilation, really horrific stuff graphically on page. There's also some minor cannibalism to this book, not what you would expect from a book I'm calling absolutely beautiful and stunning. Yeah, there's cannibalism in here. And slightly graphic too, as well, I would say. So there are those sides to this, where this contains a multitude of things. It has these heartwarming lyrical moments that are quiet and personal, such character-driven story, and yet it also has these really bombastic action sequences and high conflict battle, and a lot of graphic violence, as I said. So this has such a duality to it. It has so many layers and nuances to how the story is told. I just can't possibly gush about this story enough, and far too few people on BookTube have been talking about it. Every single person I have seen who has read it, or actually been able to finish it, has loved it. I know I was personally buddy reading this with Shannon from That's So Poe. It is graphic to the point that she did step away from reading it, because it is a lot to take on if you're going to. Very heavy. But the imagery is so beautiful, the story so unique, that I absolutely think more people on BookTube would love this if they would just pick it up. So I implore you, if you like mythic fantasy at all, if you like a non-traditional structure at all, absolutely pick up this book. It is a must read as far as I'm concerned. So that is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.